Good afternoon, or for whatever time you are joining us here today. My name is Stephen Nolan. I'm the Managing Director of the UNDP Financial Centres for Sustainability and the Head of Secretariat for the UNDP Sustainable Insurance Forum. So it's a real thrill to have you with us here today, our audience, and obviously our panel members. Today we've had panel members from all over the world and in Dublin where this event is currently taking place. And it's great to have panel members from Geneva, Frankfurt, Sacramento, London, and New York joining us today, really underpinning the global nature of this agenda. Today, this session now is the fourth and the final session of a great day. We've had global to domestic leaders join us and talk about the whole sustainable finance agenda, reflect on COP28, look forward to this year in terms of 2024, and then that intersection and the two sides of the coin between climate and nature. And so we're delighted today to have a mixture of both experts from climate and nature on this panel. And we will reflect, as I said, in COP28 and look forward to this year. We've got Mark Halle out of Geneva. We've got Cassie Flynn out of New York, UNDP. Thomas in London, TNFD. We've got Mike, the Deputy Head of California State Insurance Commissioner out of Sacramento. And we've got Pamela with EIOPA in Frankfurt. So delighted to have you all here with us today. We have an hour, and so we're going to push on straight away. And Cassie, I'm going to start with you, if that's okay, live from New York. Cassie, you know, I got the pleasure of getting to know you a lot over the last number of years, and obviously at COP this year, spending some time in your presence and watching people ask you to participate, be involved, and, you know, not trying to embarrass you, but you are a genuine rock star in this agenda at a global level and a local level. And before maybe we get into the topic today and the climate and nature piece, you know, climate advisor to the UNDP Administrator Achim Steiner, advisor to the Fiji president for COP23. How did you land in this agenda, in this space, working in this space? Just kind of curious, Cassie, if you don't mind.
Thank you so much, Stephen. And it's such a pleasure to be here. And thank you for hosting this. Certainly, yeah, working on climate change, and I think I can speak for everyone, is that it is not for the faint of heart. As we are looking at the stakes on the climate crisis, both in terms of global temperatures rising and what this means for people and future generations, we know that we need all hands on deck. And for me, I became very interested in the impacts of the climate crisis, really from an age when I started thinking about how it's not just about the environment, but it's also about people. And you know, I had an experience where I was actually in India, and I was in a small rural village, and got woken up in the middle of the night, and a hill was on fire, and they needed our help to put out the fire. And we worked all night. My shoes melted. It was a massive blaze. And when it was all over, we thought, oh my goodness, this is such a disaster. How could this happen? And then we found out actually that the farmer had set the hill on fire on purpose. And the reason that he did that was because he knew that the climate impacts of his farming capabilities were it was more profitable for him to essentially set it on fire than to continue. And this is where, for me, it was one of those moments where you start to put together that, you know, things like tackling the climate crisis are all about economics. They're about policy. It's about finance. It's about how the world works. And if we're going to tackle this crisis, we need to change how the world works. And this is where I get very passionate in these halls. You give me way too much credit in the COPs, but I get very passionate about this and how these COPs and how global discussions can really help to drive this type of change that we need at the scale that we need it.
And Cassie, you know, as I said, we were both at COP. You were there for full 2 weeks. Were your ambitions coming into COP, were they met in Dubai?
I think we all, you know, such a good question, Stephen, and we all went into COP really thinking, okay, is this going to be a demonstration of multilateralism in action, that countries can come around the table, and including some of the largest fossil fuel producers in the world and have real conversations about the fate of fossil fuels? Or is this going to be a deadlock? And we've seen that happen at many COPs. We've seen COPs really just not be able to truly address the core issues. And I think this COP, it made some very important steps forward. The biggest, of course, being talking about the transition away from fossil fuels, and then, of course, the issues on loss and damage and what it means to lose things in the climate crisis. Everything from sort of cultural heritage to economic losses to losses of health to what do we do when a country might be at risk of going underwater. These types of conversations started happening at that COP, and I think that this is where I was quite heartened to see these important steps forward. And we know the reality is that we need leaps. We must be taking leaps forward. We need to be talking about substantially the end of fossil fuels. We need to be talking what it means to keep people safe around the world in substantive ways. And this is so. I think steps, but not leaps, is maybe the answer to your question.
Yeah, somebody said today there's the incremental steps,
Mm-hmm.
but they said we didn't go backwards. And that was
Right.
the point that the ECB was saying today. I suppose just Cassie, stay with you one more moment. Across all the panels today, we talk about transition, policy, finance, so on. Nature keeps coming in, and the intersection. And again, at COP28, nature was obviously there on the agenda as well. And this year we've got COP16, the nature COP. So just the intersection between the two, Cassie, what would your perspective be on why people need to focus on both now, rather than maybe treating them as in isolation?
Right. We can't talk about solutions to the climate crisis without talking about nature. Nature and how our world is shaped, how we manage ecosystems, how we protect them, how we talk about indigenous and local communities and the particular roles that they have, what it means to be engaging and changing our values around biodiversity. These are issues that are at the heart of this, and this is where, with the COP process and with climate change, we have an opportunity, I think, really over these next couple of years, because we know that, for example, in the COP process, the national pledges, these nationally determined contributions that are meant to come in every 5 years, are meant to come in 2025. And they will come in at the Brazil COP, the Amazon COP. And this is going to be also the 10-year anniversary of the Paris Agreement. We also have this year 2 other COPs that are vastly important and influential, and that's the Biodiversity COP and the Desertification COP. And I think because we have this triple year, there's an opportunity to start to bring together in a political narrative about what it means to have biodiversity, desertification, and climate in an intertwined way, but also what it means for people on the ground. That we know we have to talk about forests, we have to talk about land, we have to talk about agriculture, we have to talk about oceans, all of these things that are central to conversations on biodiversity and desertification that are also central to tackling the climate crisis.
That's a really good way to set up the rest of the panel. So, Cassie, I will come back to you in a moment. So, thank you very much for that. Mike, I'm going to zoom over to California, Sacramento, where I think it's just around 8 a.m. or just gone past 8 a.m., I think. It could be a little bit earlier. I think it's 7 actually, 7 a.m. So thank you for joining us so early, Mike. Mike, you were also a COP, and it was great to be working with yourself, Commissioner Lara. At COP, you both participated in UNDP CIF events, and I know you had your own events as well with our colleagues in UNDP-FI and PSI and Butch and so on. Were your ambitions, your objectives coming to the COP, were they met when you guys got back on the plane and headed home?
Thanks for having me, Stephen. I really appreciate it. And, when you get back on the plane and you head home, you sort of take stock of all the things that you hope to achieve and whether or not you got every single one of them. I think in general, the big takeaway for us is that as an insurance regulator, insurance has gone from being sort of a side issue to a very central issue in a lot of these conversations. And that was a big achievement, I think, for our office to just really create the partnerships and integrate with the conversation in a way that we thought could be really productive. So in that way, we did meet our ambitions. As Cassie mentioned, this is a daunting field to be in, and so I think that I'm never going to come away saying like, yes, we did everything we hope to achieve, but I think we laid the groundwork. And I think I'll just make one comment that links to what Cassie started out with, and that is that this conversation about how we look at nature and how we look at finance and how we look at emissions, I think has evolved in a way that's really productive for where I sit as an insurance regulator. I mean, we're looking at the way you manage watersheds and forests as a way to reduce the impacts to insurance. But honestly, that's what's going to create some of the protections and emissions reductions that are going to solve emissions questions as well. And so I think that for us, this COP was an opportunity to go from, electric vehicles and forests being competing issues to being things that fit into the same set of goals and create partnerships around those goals.
Thanks very much for that, Mike. Mark, just come to you, and we're very fortunate in FC4S to have you as an advisor to FC4S and the 42 financial centres on this agenda. And our members want to do more, and they want to do more this year, and obviously with COP16 coming up. But Mike, can you maybe just take us back a little bit in terms of the role of financial centres around this agenda, why it's really important that we mobilise them in support of the biodiversity agenda, please, Mark?
Thanks, Stephen, and thanks for having me on this panel. It's an honor to advise the FC4S network, and I think anybody who's been around the sort of COP world for a long time, as I have, will have noticed one significant evolution. That is, more and more, COP after COP, the agenda is about finance. And in the beginning, it was, how can we raise the money to take the action necessary? How can we mobilize funding for biodiversity challenges, et cetera, et cetera? And it's moving in two significant ways from that. The first is that we're no longer just talking about how we can raise money to implement the action plans. We're talking about how we can reform the financial system so that it doesn't undermine the goals that we set for ourselves. So a case in point is fossil fuel subsidies, which are, as you know, absolutely colossal, over $1 trillion a year. And so it's not so much just raising money for climate action. It is no longer spending money in ways that actually undermine the goals that we have set for ourselves. And that's a very significant change. The second is that the political agenda is more and more around finance as well. I mean, the early days of the climate COPs, country delegates were often from meteorological offices, and it was about the science, it was about what we could say safely about climate change. And the science is now pretty well settled, and it's about how we can lay the foundation for taking the action at the scale and at the pace needed. So listening to Cassie's and Mike's evaluations of COP28 struck me as yes, we made progress. We made significant progress, some of it symbolic. But if you ask the question, was it progress at the pace and scale that we need to address the problems? My answer would be no. But my answer would also be that there's a great deal happening out there, a lot of it triggered by the sorts of political debate and decisions that are taken at COPs that build their own momentum. So we look at the pace at which renewable energy is coming on stream. It's absolutely unbelievable. If we look at the spread of electric vehicles, it's quite impressive. If we look at, in fact, the generation of climate-related funding, it's expanding very rapidly. So on the one hand, you've got we're still pumping carbon and greenhouse gases into the atmosphere at a pace that we can't sustain. But on the other hand, you're seeing all these actions building momentum, and some of this momentum is unstoppable. So I like to see it as a kind of race, that the good things happening are accelerating, building momentum, and the bad things that are still happening need to be countered. But what happens at places like COP28, even in an oil-producing state, even with the significant lobbies from the fossil fuel industry, I'd like to see it as a way of accelerating action so that the outcomes become inevitable. But I think today, and this is true also in the biodiversity area, it's all about finance. It's really all about finance. And not so much how much money we can get into the different funds and coffers, but how the financial system works and how it can be reformed so that the normal action of financial centers actually supports the climate agenda and the biodiversity agenda. And I think we're seeing a lot more interest in that. At COP15 in Montreal, there were several hundred financial professionals there, and a lot of the events were around finance that we've never seen before. So I think we're coming to a kind of crunch point. We're in a race, as I described earlier, and I think that there are, you can imagine pathways and scenarios where that race can be won, but there's a lot of work ahead.
Thanks for that, Mark. Pamela, if I could maybe come to you and the European Insurance and Occupational Pensions Authority, or EIOPA. Very interesting point that Mike said, that insurance used to be perhaps a side issue, now is very much central. And we see that within the UNDP Sustainable Insurance Forum and the focus on transition and so on and so forth. In terms of EIOPA, and we had Frank Ellison from the European Central Bank board member on the call earlier on, where are you on this agenda right now in terms of nature-related insurance laws, and what's that pathway looking like for you in the coming years, please?
Yes, thank you very much, Stephen, and thanks for all the other panelists for giving very good leads into this. And it's true, EIOPA is also quite a new kid on the block when it comes to nature-related finance. But since 2018, we've been working on sustainability risks, and we've seen also our increased involvement.
So Pamela, I'm going to hit pause for a moment. There's somebody else coming in there. Just there's a background noise. I don't know where that's coming from.
Yes, actually, it's my colleague who's speaking.
Not from that was right there, so forward of the
Okay, well,
so, shall I wait and come back until my colleague is done?
I'll come back in a moment.
Thomas, yes.
Yeah, we will move to Thomas. The bold Thomas. Look at his big grin on him there. The bold Thomas. Thomas, I know you weren't at a COP. Brand new baby girl was born just before Christmas, so congratulations on that. TNFD. So I was fortunate enough to be part of the informal working group, which worked on this. I've worked with you in UNDP CIF when you were the climate manager of the Bank of England, of the climate unit. And then obviously you jumped over to TNFD, which to me was a kind of a strong signal where you see the world going as well. At the World Economic Forum in Davos, I think 300 plus firms sign up. Where are you now since COP in terms of TNFD, and what's the growth been like in the last few months, please, Thomas?
Thanks, Stephen. I think, like the other panelists first, it's absolutely a pleasure to be here and joining in this excellent conversation. I think to your point, Stephen, and I want to build on what Mark said on this race analogy. I think what you've seen just only a month ago, we've had 320 organizations across 46 different countries put themselves on the start line. They have committed to adopt the TNFD recommendations over the next few financial years. And what we're really seeing now is a lot of engagement kind of broadly, 46 plus countries of organizations that want to be able to identify, assess, understand their nature-related dependencies, impacts, risks, and opportunities. And we're expecting more to come on stream ahead of the next summit in Halle, ahead of COP16, where we're expecting to see further growth in those numbers as well. I think as well, this coalition or this race towards, the North Star that was set only December, not last year, but before, in Montreal, I think is also a testament to needing to align around that North Star. And for nature-related corporate reporting, that means alignment, and that means consistency, and that means building collaboratively. So the TNFD recommendations were built with a multitude of knowledge partners, bringing together a lot of active groups in this area. And as you've mentioned, Stephen, and we've been really lucky to work with the CIF, but also the NGFS and others on the kind of regulatory side, to really be able to get that common understanding, that foundational understanding, and really that foundational amount language as well, so that regulator, when talking to a firm they supervise, and vice versa, when they're talking about nature, they're talking in the same language, which is an absolute essential to be able to support and promote disclosure and support and promote action, actually, to be able to achieve the goals and make sure that we all finish that race that Mark was talking about. But I think in terms of what we've seen is a lot of great progress to date. We don't sit on our laurels. We keep moving forward, and we're going to work with an increasing number of organizations to be able to make sure by the time we arrive hopefully in nice Calais, that we're going to have even more organizations committed to be able to start and work with us on this journey.
And I know, Tom, that's fantastic. It's great to see the growth. And I know our colleagues in BioFin, UNDP, are also playing an active role within the TNFD. So it's great to see that collaboration and support. Pamela, I'm going to shoot back to you, if I may. We were just talking about EIOPA, and you were kind of saying that this is kind of a relatively kind of first steps in the journey. Maybe I got that wrong, but maybe back to you, Pamela,
Yes.
please.
Yes, thanks. And I'd like to reflect on the COP27, 28 progress we've made on climate, and then also venturing into nature. It's true that what Mike said, we haven't been the usual stakeholders at COP events. I mean, we're an insurance regulator and supervisor, but people have started realizing indeed that the resilience of the society is very much dependent also on solutions that are being brought by financial companies, such as insurers. And that's typically why I entered into the insurance field, is because I thought they have a value for society. It's insuring risks, it's offering products to consumers to actually enable them taking risks. And what we've seen in the last couple of years, and what I've witnessed since we started working on in 2018, actually, at EIOPA on these sustainability risks, is that we've been hit by quite a few systemic issues. We've had the pandemic, we're working on climate change. We see more and more what the loss of biodiversity means for the economy and for citizens. So there is a big issue of resilience of society. And there we have, of course, to see what the role of insurers can be, but also what are actually the possibilities for these insurers, because we as insurance supervisors, we're there to take care of financial stability and protection of consumers. And you can only stretch the insurance capacities to a certain extent where issues or risks are not insurable anymore. So we have to give this, let's say, it's almost a double materiality. We have to help insurers to find out how they can mitigate these risks and how they can contribute to these risks. But at the same time, we have also to see that the sector itself remains resilient to continue to do its business. So what we've seen in COP27, we were asked on one of the side events. I wasn't on the main stage, but we were asked to present the dashboard we had developed to assess protection gaps for climate risks. And that was a major step. And this is a major tool. It's a major way to identify where actually the risks lie and where actually action can be taken. And then last year, it was also maybe a side event, but it was really interesting to be invited to speak on climate adaptation. And that is something that's really close to our heart. It's not just investing in adaptation. For us, what it means is also how insurers can actually raise the awareness and incentivize through their products measures to reduce the risks, actually, so that also insurance remains available. So those are let's say, the climate COPs, and looking ahead to the nature and biodiversity. I mean, the expectations were really high since the last COP15, where the global framework was adopted, and we've seen since then, we've issued a paper. We have actually today the good news that the European Parliament adopted a nature restoration law, which doesn't mean that it's the final step, but these are big steps that are being taken. And also the ECB, which you've heard this morning, is also taking more steps on nature. So this means there's really a momentum. But there's always a momentum. Unfortunately, there's always been a momentum. But what we can do this year is to really look at how are all these targets and these plans coming together? How are these commitments maybe contributing? How will they contribute to reaching all these targets, and see how the financial sector can contribute? And I think we have to be innovative, but also mindful of how far financial sectors can actually contribute. And then we speak of public-private initiatives also, just to put in another topic. So a lot of high expectations and work to do.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Pamela. Cassie, that's an important point that Pamela has made about the financial system and the financial sector, that not all solutions will come from that financial sector. So not burden is the wrong word, but from a real economy perspective. But this collaboration, these solutions that need to be developed in your journey and your work, because you also oversee the climate promise. How much are you touching up against the financial services sector in the countries that you're working? Are they as engaged as you think they should be, as you would like them to be? Or are you surprised actually at the level of engagement that's so high?
I think we've certainly reached a new era in thinking about how the financial sector is engaging in climate action, and we've seen this a lot when it comes to the work of the climate promise that you mentioned. This is UNDP's support for all of these national targets, these nationally determined contributions, these pledges that countries have to make every 5 years. And we have seen, we're now sort of starting the sort of third generation of these NDCs. And the first generation was in 2015, second in 2020, 2021, give or take a little bit because of COVID. And now, as we look toward 2025, the question that everyone is asking is, how can these climate targets be investable? We know that in the first and second generation, the first one, it was very largely about countries showing up to Paris with an NDC in their pocket. How can they show up, have being able to demonstrate that multilateralism is in action? And then the second one was very much about levels of ambition. How can we demonstrate that countries are meaningfully talking about reducing emissions, meaningfully talking about increasing their resilience to climate impacts? And now this third generation is really about investing. How can these NDCs be investable? And I think this goes to a couple of things that my fellow panelists have been talking about, and Mark talking about reforming the financial system. We know that we can't have traditional approaches to be able to achieve these NDCs. We have to be thinking about how the rules can change. And I think this is a conversation that I get the sense that a lot of financial institutions are very engaged in right now, because they know that it's coming, and they know that how these systems and rules can change can help to provide incentives for new ways of investing. Likewise, really exciting tools that are out there, and we heard that from Thomas and Pamela and Mike, and looking at how the role of insurance, the role of bonds, the role of debt swaps. How do we get this right, and how can we start to create a new way of thinking and a new way of gauging? And I think there's been a lot of enthusiasm by the financial sector. This last COP in Dubai was the largest COP ever held. And I have to say, I saw more conversations about finance, more conversations from real players that had not been, as other panelists were saying, had sort of not traditionally been at a COP, but now are really central to these COP conversations, because we know that really bringing in the financial expertise and the financial tools and instruments are central to how we can address this crisis. So I was very encouraged by it.
Thanks for that, Cassie. Mark, just going back to, investable or bankable. In the previous panel, we had Oscar from who's the CEO of Nairobi International Financial Center, a member of FC4S, and he was talking about, scaling the finance that's required, bankable, investable. Use that phrase or that word that Cassie used, but there are challenges, right? And so within FC4S, and we're looking at this SDG pipeline builder, where are you seeing the innovation come from, Mark, within the financial services sector as you seek to scale? And what are some of those barriers that you've identified, and how potentially can FC4S help overcome them, please?
I think FC4S is devoting increasingly much of its time to working with its financial centers to address those very specific barriers. So it's taken a very practical orientation of late. What we see, we're coming out of an age where we thought, oh, gee, the private sector has all the capital. Why don't we get them to invest in climate and get them to invest in nature, and then we will have solved the problem. And I think we still believe that that's a real potential, but it's only going to be realized if there is serious work done. On the one hand, we see the barriers, certainly in the nature area, in corporations and financial actors who say, well, we'd love to do it, but we don't have the data, and the norms aren't there, and the standards aren't there, and we don't really know what to do first, and we don't properly know how to assess risk, and we don't really know how to find investment grade projects. And what you're seeing is that very, very rapidly, all of those reasons for not acting are evaporating. And I point to the work of TNFD. Anybody who says that nature-related data is not available is going to have to watch out, because TNFD will lead to an absolute avalanche of new data of exactly the kind that investors need. But I think what's going to solve the problem is a combination of bold and innovative action by investors and policy and regulation that helps shape the markets in a way that provides incentive for nature-related or climate-related investment. So this idea that the market will solve it by itself, I think, it's possible that it might happen that way, but it would be too slow. And that what we need is a combination of smart regulation, smart policymaking, as we've seen recently in the European Union, combined with the development of market tools that will help potential investors find the right sort of projects. The basic problem you have in nature-related finance is that whereas it is possible to develop bankable nature-related projects, the risk perception around nature tends to be too high. The returns tend to be too low and are spread out over too long a period. So it's not that you can't find bankable projects, it's just that they find a hard time competing for capital with projects that have a much more rapid return. The other thing we've learned, and this is through the work with our financial centers in developing countries, that in fact, you can't expect the investors to develop the bankable projects unless there's an offer coming from the recipient countries. The investors are just going to turn elsewhere. So the work that FC4S is doing in developing pipeline builders in these countries and coming up with the sorts of projects that could attract the kind of capital that is available is really important. I think that we won't really get there until we have sort of robust, binding, enforceable net zero and nature positive standards. And we're closer to that in climate than we are in the biodiversity world. But I think that could provide a frame that would shift the way risk is perceived and change the way that finance flows.
Thanks for that, Mark. Mike, if I can maybe switch to you, because let's bring it down to a state level now. It is California, which is a significant state in its own right, within America, but also at a global level in terms of size of economy. How are you? Sorry, go back to Mark. Mark made a very interesting point there. Smart regulation was the term we use, and I would see California as kind of an example of that under your leadership at Commissioner Ricardo. How are you in California making progress on both the emissions and the resilience at the same time, giving fires, floods? You turn on the CNN every now and again, and California literally is on fire or being flooded. So you're really facing this on a kind of monthly basis. How are you making progress? And then how are you, back to Mark's point, and forgive me, Mark, if I'm paraphrasing you correctly, stimulating through that smart regulation the financial services sector to act and not actually have actors leaving the state because they're saying, well, we can no longer insure?
Thanks, Stephen. No, I think it's a question that kind of merges a bunch of the comments that were made on the panel today, whether it's protection gaps or nature-related data. But in California, we're a big state. We're in the news a lot for fires and floods, and so what we've tried to do is to and it's always controversial, but be a smart regulator when it comes to what do we incentivize, and then also be a forward-looking regulator when it comes to what insurance barriers do we see coming down the road. So I'll give you an example. So when it comes to wildfires, a year and a half ago, we wrote our first regulations ever, at least in the US, that require insurance companies to reward taking risk reduction measures for structures, for homes and businesses, and reflecting those in how they price insurance. And what that does is it aligns what the insurance sector is doing with what our public sector is trying to do in terms of building codes and grants for low-income homeowners to retrofit their home. And so it tries to take on that fire risk problem, right at where it's hitting people and tragically causing damage today. That's going to help provide long-term incentives for insurance companies, for individuals, for local governments. But then on the emissions side, we're also looking to the future as far as, well, we have really strong regulations in California on zero emission trucks and buses. That's going to put us on a trajectory to hopefully transition at a pace and scale that's important to climate change. But we don't yet know, like with many technologies, whether the insurance markets will be there to write policies for all the zero emission electric trucks we're going to need. We have two major ports in California, in Long Beach and Los Angeles. And so these are kind of like the seemingly narrow issues that could have a huge impact to our emissions profile. And we're not the only jurisdiction with a major port. So if we want to see 300,000 electric heavy duty trucks in the next 15 years, our insurance market's going to be able to write those policies in order to not slow down that progress. And so we're looking to try to reduce those insurance barriers on emissions at the same time as we're trying to reward the incentives for home hardening against wildfire. And at risk of being too long-winded here, just as a former wildlife biologist, I think that some of the next steps are to look at the data that, we've done wildlife biology in the world much longer than we've done climate science. So, there is a long history of trying to figure out biodiversity issues, wildlife issues, forest issues, and how to integrate the data. And so I do think that that's a huge opportunity in the next few years.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Thomas, I may just flip to you for a moment. We've had some panel members today from emerging developing economies as well, and part of their challenge is, kind of a sense of sometimes being overwhelmed. So if you look, I'm in Dublin right now. We had, large asset managers, large banks, European banks kind of saying, wow, there's so much happening. What's coming out of Brussels? What's coming out of Frankfurt? So you're in different economies. You may not have the same resources. Are you prioritizing TNFD? Are you prioritizing ISSB and others? How are you helping emerging economies adopt TNFD or working with them towards adoption?
Thanks, Stephen. A really good set of questions. And I think, just to provide some additional context to your question as well, we can't forget that given the locality, a specific locality of nature, and we know where some of the most biodiverse areas of the world are in emerging and developing economies. So in short, to be able to globally achieve our nature-related aims and targets, investment of shifting financial flows to support action and projects on the ground in emerging and developing economies is absolutely critical. So what the TNFD has done and will do to support that, I'll split my answer up in two ways. One, on what it has done, first is through its consultation. So we have a set of consultation groups all over the world, spanning across emerging and developing economies. And that's really to make sure that we have our eyes, ears, we're listening on the ground to be able to, what was in the design and development phase, make sure that the recommendations and the additional guidance could be really applicable and practical for organizations, no matter if you're from wherever you are in the world. I think also, which is critical as part of that design and development phase, is particularly for emerging and developing economies, is to make sure we as a secretariat, we as a task force as well, provided as much guidance, tools, direction as possible, because as you said, Stephen, we're really conscious that, businesses are busy. Sustainability reporting needs to be sustainable for an organization, and particularly for those SMEs, which are typically the backbone of emerging and developing economies. They need to really know where to go and what to do as easily as possible. As we now look ahead to supporting and galvanizing action, and particularly working with those organizations in emerging and developing economies, we know we can do more. We will do more to make sure that we streamline, simplify, really provide as easy and as practical to those organizations as possible with the existing guidance and materials we have. And I think just then to kind of wrap it together, Stephen, I think what you mentioned as well with ISSB and other regulatory developments, a key thing I like to think is needing all of them to make sure that they all abide by their ABC, and that is alignment, that is building on each other, and that is being consistent, because that means if you're an organization, whether it be in South Africa, whether it be in Malaysia, whether it be in Canada, you know that what is going on is all pointing in one coordinated direction, albeit with some nuance, to help reach, as Mark said, the end line, that finish line, that North Star, to make sure that we're all going in that direction. So I think that's what organizations want, that they've been telling us that wherever they are in the world, and making sure that wherever these frameworks or other tools are being created, making sure they abide by the ABC makes it as simple and as easy for organizations to get started on their journey.
Great, Tom. You'll hear me using that ABC myself in the coming months, so just forget where I heard it from if you're on the same panel, okay? Pamela, if I can switch back to yourself. So you mentioned nature restoration law, which is a big deal today in terms of Europe, but as you said, it's kind of a first step. In terms of EIOPA and the work you hope to do over the next 12 months, or maybe even a little bit longer around the nature, what does that look like? Because you got the instructions from the Commission. I'm not too sure actually how it works, but you are instructed, or you go to the Commission. What are you specifically doing on nature in the next 12 to 18 months, please?
Yes, thanks a lot, Stephen. I would just like to reflect on one or two things which the previous panelists have said, because I think it was Mark, if I also paraphrase him correctly, he mentioned really the role of regulation. And I think what we've seen in the last couple of years, and just the example of nature restoration law, that many of these climate analysis or really need to address climate and nature is entering into real legislation these days. And I think this makes a big difference. And this is what we've been seeing in the last couple of weeks, months, and let's say the last 5 years. We have even sustainability requirements in Solvency II, which is an insurance regulatory tool, which actually asks insurers to manage risks, but also to consider the impacts of their investment on environment, for example. So just to highlight what I think is really the importance of having the regulatory framework in place, and indeed maybe also being more concrete and maybe more clear about the targets that have to be pursued. Because supervisors will not set the targets, but today, also the companies are being asked to have transition plans increasingly. We're not totally set yet in Europe, but we have to know what transition targets are being pursued, and only then you can measure actually the progress. So that was a side thing of the value of regulation and clear regulation. On nature, indeed, Stephen, we've received well, recently the Solvency II regulation has been reviewed, and now it's being wrapped up, but we know very clearly we have a mandate from the Commission to actually evaluate how insurers have been assessing their exposures in their own risk and solvency assessment to biodiversity losses. So this is something we will have to analyze. So we're going to engage with our supervisors and with the industry to see whether insurers have actually been thinking about it and to what extent. Now, as much as we have been progressing on climate, 5 years ago, we had 13% of the insurers that we had covered in our exercise. Only 13% actually referred to climate change analysis in the ORSA. So I do not expect to have a higher percentage today on biodiversity, just because biodiversity is even more multifaceted. We're starting on it, so I don't expect insurers to have done much, but we see a lot of good tools that are coming around from the NGFS and indeed the disclosure requirements from the TNFD. So we'll do the assessment, but then the question is, what shall we follow up with? What kind of risk-based approach can we suggest to our industry to actually address these risks? And I think what is very important, regulation is there to address the barriers. Indeed, are there any limitations? Are there capital requirements that are maybe hindering but on the other hand, we also have to keep the safeguards. Because we can't just ask companies to invest in certain activities if they cannot manage their risks. So really, this regulation on nature, we'll also have to see. We have issued our paper last year. What are the transmission channels? We'll do an analysis of the exposure. And then in June 2025, we'll aim to inform the Commission of what we think could be done to integrate biodiversity risk analysis better in the company's risk management and own risk and solvency assessment.
Thanks for that, Pamela. There's a lot of work ahead. Will be an understatement from your perspective in EIOPA. But as you said, the paper last year was fantastic as a starting point, and I know consultation and so on. Cassie, may I just come to you for a moment? It was interesting. A panel member mentioned this morning, this agenda, what may happen in the first week of November in the US elections could obviously really inform where the US may go. Obviously, previous, you had the states and the city level and companies really went for it if there wasn't the federal action per se. But now you're also seeing kind of an anti-ESG agenda emerge, obviously, in the US. So I'm not asking you to comment on that, but there's also 50 other elections will take place in democratic countries later on this year as well, across the course of the year. In Brussels and in Europe the last few weeks, you have seen farmers protests in Paris, in Brussels, Bloc. And some of the comments today, Cassie, was that this is a really important year from a kind of democracy and where we go with this agenda. And we were talking about SMEs in Europe, and they're kind of the backbone, and they're under a lot of pressure. And, you read articles, but they don't know where to go. They don't know how to access capital, what new kit. So what are you, if I may, Cassie, seeing within climate promise at a local level on these policies and regulations that UNDP are supporting these countries engage with? Is there pushback? Is it embracing, or is it embraced because we need to do this? I'm just interested in your thoughts, Cassie.
Yeah, thank you so much, Stephen, and really also building on what my fellow panelists have been talking about is that we are seeing a lot of momentum and tools available on climate action, and we have to make sure that the systems and the politics and the incentives are all in place. And we're seeing this even, in some of the conversations we're having as a part of the climate promise. We're seeing, for example, the global cost of urban flooding every year is about $1 trillion. This is a massive weight on economies. Yet we know also that the annual cost for adapting to global flooding is somewhere around 60 to 80 billion a year. And so the implications of these types of policy choices, how do you just help governments to make smart policy? How do you help them to weigh and have the information and the support to be able to have some of these incentives really play out? And this is where this is not divorced, as you said, from the massive political context that we are living in right now. I still remember when the Paris Agreement was adopted. We thought, okay, here we go. Here is the pathway is agreed. It took us a long time to get here, and now the road is smooth. Little did we know that just a year later, certainly, the elections of the United States, President Trump pulling the United States out of the Paris Agreement, and then, of course, with President Biden coming back, we're starting to see also the political reality of climate being so high on these agendas. And in fact, this morning I was in a meeting with a group of Latin American countries, and the elections are very real and alive in Latin America. And I think this issue of how people are approaching the ballot box and how they are thinking about climate in the context of their elected leaders will have such a tangible mark on our collective progress. And I think this is going to play out in a couple of ways, because obviously we know that if we are going to reach a 1.5 degree trajectory, we need the G20 to move. We need them to move quickly. And elections are happening across the G20 in rapid fashion. And the decisions that these new leaders will make or break this effort. Likewise, people feeling, and we've seen this with the climate promise, the issue of justice when it comes to climate action. We've done a lot of analysis on the impacts of changing fossil fuel prices and changing energy prices on economies. And something that has come very clear is that nearly every single economy that has seen a very rapid fossil fuel price change undergoes some sort of civil unrest. And this cuts across every economy from of course, yellow vests to Ecuador to Chile to, and you saw this really start to play out over these last years. And so I think as we look ahead, having these rules change, these incentives change, being able to have these tools that are now starting to operate at a different scale than they used to, which is so exciting. But also being able to think about how we bring people along and how we do this. And we talk about a just energy transition. We talk about justice in terms of agriculture and in terms of land use and indigenous and local community rights. How does this all play together and be central in these massive sea change of tools and instruments that we need to roll out? So a lot of work ahead, but it's certainly going to be an eventful year.
Thanks for that, Cassie. Just conscious of time, we've got time for one more question each panel member. Mike, I'm not asking you to guess where the election should go this year in the US, but California as a large part of the US. Cassie's last point there was very interesting. How do we bring the people along? So at a state level, how do you and Commissioner Lara bring the population of California along with some of these measures? Or is it, easier is the wrong word, but because the state and population are seeing the wildfires, are experiencing the flooding, has there been a tipping point at the population level of California saying we need to do something?
Well, I think that, California has always had a bit of a leading role in terms of different ways in which we try to tackle the climate crisis. And in some ways it's been really powerful. In other ways, it's, taken a few years to figure it out. I mean, I used to work on super pollutants like HFCs and methane, and you start looking at these different things that California's put in place. And I think that they do show leadership on the global stage when it comes to reducing those emissions. I do think at the same time, we have to really recognize that a lot of decisions are made at a variety of levels of government. So there are many decisions made at the local level that are critical to what our future resilience and emissions look like. And also within my sector, the insurance sector, the U.S. States each has a regulator of insurance, and we all try to work together to advance policy as a group, and that reflects, the priorities of all the different states and their realities as well. And I think, in that case, they do tend to be laboratories of innovation in terms of, really learning from the experience. I learn a lot from the Gulf states in the U.S. in terms of the experience that they've had with major storms and what that does to their infrastructure. And I think where I land in terms of where California is going is we have our climate goals. We also have to be very aware of the fact that these fires and floods, they affect solar panels, they affect infrastructure. And so we have to think about how to marry some of these goals together and have local governments really participate in that process, because ultimately when you're rebuilding after a fire, there's going to be building codes in place that are either going to have you do the same thing you did, or they're going to have you do something that's probably better for the future. And I think those are the decisions that add up to what turns into national policy.
And Mike, tell me, yourself and Commissioner Lara, you're hosting an event in April. What is that, please? This appears to be a global event.
Yeah, absolutely. So in April, we're hosting the inaugural Global Sustainable Insurance Summit in Los Angeles. And what we determined from going to this year's COP, but this has been growing through the COPs, is this comment I made earlier, which is insurance has always been an issue, but it's not been so central. And I think now it's become central. And so it's important for us as the fourth largest insurance market in the world to really try to focus on okay, how do we look at the role of insurance on resiliency, emissions, and our interaction with utilities, with First Nations tribes, with other governments on doing coordinated policy. And so we're hosting this in April. I really hope that out of it come a lot of productive new measures, and we're excited for it.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. Pamela, final question to yourself, and I saw you nodding your head there when Mike was talking about how do we marry some of these policies together. Your goal for 2024, please, from an EIOPA perspective?
Well, we have quite a few activities. I mean, we have over 30 activities on sustainable finance, but and they cover, let's say, 4 areas. And one of the prominent areas is still protection gaps. And I think we still have some progress to make on making sure not only that protection gaps for natural catastrophes are well understood. For that, we have the dashboard. But also what we are working on this year is, together with the European Central Bank, is also to think what kind of policy measures are possible, because we've developed this framework of shared resilience solutions where we see there are issues to availability, affordability of insurance, which cannot only be solved by insurance. So I think insurance is a key node in the solutions, but also we also have to make sure that I think what Mike referred to is infrastructure resilience is not only something that can be brought forward by insurers. So for that, we're thinking of let's say the public-private activities or the elements of public-private cooperation that can be put in place, and what are the key elements that exist across jurisdictions. And maybe this can inspire other jurisdictions or even supranational initiatives to promote, in particular, the prevention of risks, because that is key to insurance. I mean, if losses keep increasing for many, many reasons, we also have to take measures to actually prevent these losses from increasing, and only then can you safeguard also insurance. So I think that is one of the key areas. And of course, what else? We are going to consult, for example, on capital charges for natural catastrophes. We see that natural catastrophes are increasing. Now, this would actually mean that also the capital charges would increase, but we also have to see how these, whether the capital charges are actually appropriate. There are new risks. There can be also emerging risks in some member states which were not taken into account. So you can look forward to that from March onwards. And of course, we'll be wrapping up also the prudential treatment for fossil fuels. If I can put it in a nutshell, that caused quite a riot, but we also have to think about that. But of course, there are many things, and I think protection gaps remains one of the key areas in which we can also make progress.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Pamela. Thomas, just in the minute or two we have left, quick summary from you, 2024.
2024 is going to be growing the number of adoption of the TNFD recommendations, continue to spread awareness of what we are and what we're doing and what's out there. I think, as has been said across the panelists, trying to debunk a lot of myths about not being enough data, where the data is, what tools do you need. It is really about directing people in a way with all this appeared complexity. It is really just bringing it and focusing the mind to support the action. So we're hoping the numbers will grow. We look forward to continuing to work and collaborate to further push on the technological frontier. So priorities that we've set out quite clearly includes transition plans as well with regards to nature, and looking how that work evolves along with all the other work we've been doing really to support the adoption of the recommendations. Also a key part, overarching a lot of it, is building capacity. So I know that's been talked about on this panel, but really now that the recommendations and the guidance is out, it's working with organizations on the ground to make sure they feel well enough equipped to put in place the actions that are required to adopt the TNFD recommendations.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Thomas. Mark, just a quick pivot. We're in Ireland, delighted to be undertaking the event today with the International Sustainable Finance Centre of Excellence, supported by Skillnet Ireland. You know a lot about the Sustainable Finance Skillnet here in Ireland. Mark, you were good enough to support the development of Ireland's first nature finance strategy, and I know you're in Dublin in a few weeks. There's going to be several roundtables organised when you're here. What should a jurisdiction like Dublin be looking at in the whole area of biodiversity finance now? What should it be trying to do? Top one or two things, please.
It should be looking at it as an area of massive opportunity, not how you manage risk, but what an evolving nature-related or bioeconomy market will look like, and getting out there first. And that means looking at the kind of regulatory shifts that need to happen. It means building the skills available to corporations and financial institutions who want to go in this direction, but very often have a hard time finding the capacity to get there. And then I think continuing, as Ireland has done very well, to stimulate innovation, to support innovation, whether it's financial instrument development, whether it's technology, and then linking up with other financial centers to draw on their best practice. So that would be, in a minute, the formula that I would offer you.
Thanks for that, Mike. Mark, sorry, forgive me. Cassie, if I could come to you last, we started with you, we're going to finish with you. 2024, what are you hoping to see?
This is the year where we have to show progress on the ground. I think that, and this sort of merges into even some of the big political context here in terms of, you know, what you were asking about with elections and so forth, that we have to show that this can work, that there are solutions out there, that people can access them, and being able to sort of build as the panelists were saying, sort of build capacities, demonstrate opportunity, and being able to tell the story of this global, national, and local transition that we so dearly need. And so the hope is that 2024 is a springboard, and we can really demonstrate this progress throughout.
Well, look, guys, thank you very much. Mark, Cassie, Thomas, Mike, Pamela, it's been a real pleasure to moderate this session. As you wrap up, it's just the last session of the day. It's been a long day, but a great day. It's just fantastic reflecting. We've had representatives from Dublin, Beijing, Geneva, Madrid, Astana, Nairobi, Frankfurt, New York, London, and of course, Sacramento. So it's been a great day with the UNDP FC4S and the Irish-based International Sustainable Finance Centre of Excellence. I won't even attempt to try and summarize what I've heard across the four panels because I wouldn't be able to, but I love that expression at the end, Cassie, a springboard, build capacities, demonstrate opportunities. And yes, there's so much about management, risk management, but we do need to demonstrate the opportunities because this is a significant opportunity at a global level. So thank you all for joining us today. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, Mike. Our colleagues in Europe enjoy the evening, and Cassie, you're going into lunch now. So thank you very much, Mark and colleagues, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.